Welcome back for another episode of Husky Careers Unleashed. We've got another member of our Michigan Tech family joining us here today, and we're going to be focusing on the twists and turns of career, maybe even leaving a career unintentionally without a plan, but how it all unfolds and works out. So let's kick off our episode and have our guest introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Brianna Kratz. I am Assistant Director of Residence Education at Michigan Technological University. I've been here since November 2021, guiding the learning that students are doing in the residence halls while they're outside the classroom.
Very nice. And I think a lot of people kind of forget that a lot of education in the college environment does happen outside of the classroom. And that's why it's important to have programs like this so that we can kind of help students develop their career as well as their lifestyle while they're in a setting like this at Michigan Tech.
It's true. I think you'd be surprised by how many roommate conflicts turn into, this is something that's really important to me and actually I need to advocate for in my future career.
Yeah, that's a great point. So speaking about career and kind of a collegiate experience, let's jump into kind of how did your career start in the realm of higher ed? Is that something you had planned on ahead of time, or was it kind of just a natural progression in your journey?
Oh, I didn't know that my job existed until I went to college. And even while I was in college, my exact job didn't exist yet. When I was in college, I was a resident assistant. So I kind of followed the student leadership track. But I was an English writing major. And when you take a lot of classes on poetry and writing short stories, you graduate and think to yourself, not really sure what I want to do. Um, so, what I decided to do was the Disney College program, where I was a parking attendant at Disney's Hollywood Studios for 6 months after graduation. Um, I got to take classes from Disney professionals and got some great sunburn out of it. After that, I also just didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So I job searched for 6 whole months and got a message from a person who knew me when I was an RA. And they said, would you like to be a hall director at this college that you've never heard of in Nebraska? And I said, I don't know what else I'm going to do. Let's apply. And so I applied, I interviewed, and I got a job within 45 minutes of a phone interview. They
Wow.
really needed a hall director. And after 2 years of being a hall director and supervising RAs, that's when I quit without a plan, and spent some time back home in Chicago doing the soul searching thing and trying to figure out what I wanted, before eventually finding my way back to higher ed and following the higher ed track back to grad school and then Michigan Tech.
What did you end up getting your graduate degree in?
I got my graduate degree in student affairs and higher
Okay.
education from Marquette University.
Oh, yeah.
So I essentially got a graduate degree to do the job that I'm doing right now.
So, I mean, it sounds like after doing some of that soul searching, you kind of found an idea of where you wanted to go and then got the additional education to get you in that track and kind of continue on that career journey.
During that soul searching process, I was a security aide at Loyola Academy in Chicago. So it's a private Jesuit high school in the suburb of Wilmette. I had gone there as a high school student, and I thought maybe going back to my roots in this regard might be helpful for me to figure things out. Um, and I learned a lot about myself and how working with high school students is maybe not of interest to me.
Well, and that's important in any kind of career is figuring out what isn't necessarily a right fit for you And so doing some of that trial and error and having that self-discovery of realizing, you know what, this isn't the right fit. So let's find what the next step is and how that can kind of drive your journey moving forward. So it sounds like it was a good experience being able to go in there, go back to your roots, and then realizing that maybe it's time to pivot into something a little bit different away from that kind of an opportunity. So let's dive into some of our questions here. Was there ever a moment early on that you had the thought that you're kind of on the wrong path? And that's what led you to maybe kind of reevaluating where you wanted to go?
I would say that for me, it was more akin to feeling like I had committed to a path too early.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps I had committed to being a hall director and working in residence life, and I hadn't given anything else a try. So even while I was working at Loyola Academy, I was still job searching for more copywriting related things, things that would get me closer to writing related
Mm-hmm.
careers, and volunteering with the Chicago poetry organizations to get me closer to writing. But through that process, I was thinking more and more about how it was the people that drew me to what I enjoy doing.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I'm not going to make money writing poetry, I'm still doing plenty of writing
Mm-hmm.
in my job.
So it sounds like you're still able to find ways to apply what you learned in your undergraduate degree and leverage some of those skills into what you're doing now that you've kind of furthered your education with a higher education degree, which brought you ultimately back into res life. And so far, would you say it's been a fun journey kind of discovering this new path for yourself?
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in college being a place to learn how to think and learn how you're going to move through the world. So, I would say that my being a writer definitely informs the way that I approach a problem. And so I come into a meeting and I'm looking at this as a rough draft.
Hmm.
And we're going to revise and see how we can make this process more of a final draft, more polished, more suited for its intended audience.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way, again, to leverage those skills that you learned in kind of a unique twist on your own career journey. I know I've talked about it with some of our other guests in various episodes. I'm a Michigan Tech alum, and my background's mechanical engineering, which is not what I'm doing these days. But the problem solving elements that we learned in engineering school can be applied to any kind of industry. So it's just another example of how you can take something that you learned, whether it was in a class, during an experience, during a job, and kind of morph it into something that is applicable to your current adventure or career opportunities.
Absolutely.
Let's jump into a little bit more info of kind of what led up to your sabbatical and deciding that it was time to take a step back to kind of reevaluate where things were at.
I had worked for 2 years at Wayne State College in Wayne, Nebraska. And so I was a 20 to 23-year-old human out in the cornfields of Nebraska. And honestly, there's not a lot of opportunity, or at least for me, there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity to get involved in the larger community or be what I assumed a 23-year-old was supposed to be, which is a person who's going out to a bar and maybe grabbing a drink with friends, because I couldn't do that in a small town where 90% of the people in that bar are going to recognize me. And maybe that's not professional to be seen out and about in that way. So I felt very much under a microscope in the small town, in addition to feeling have I committed to higher ed when really what I want is to be a writer? Can I get paid to write? Uh, these were questions that I hadn't actually asked myself.
Hmm.
I had dived into the paying gig that gave me housing, gave me a meal plan, um, and gave me the opportunity to talk with people from rural Nebraska who I would never have met if I hadn't taken that job. Um, so going back to Chicago really gave me a way of getting lost in a way. So the bigger city, I escaped that microscope,
Hmm.
and it gave me more of an opportunity to explore in a way that would get me lost, like
Hmm.
amongst the crowd.
Yeah. And I can imagine it was a very different experience going to such a small town, kind of one of those places where you walk in and everybody does know who you are, which can be a good or a bad thing. And like you'd mentioned in higher ed, sometimes it's where do you draw that line? And so it sounds like it was the right time to kind of reevaluate and head back. Was there any time during the process that you had kind of doubts or fears that you were trying to figure out during this period of unknown?
Oh, definitely. And I think a large part of why left was because I was afraid. Because if I decided to stay, then was I locking myself into something that I wasn't 100% certain of?
Hmm.
Um, if I decide to stay, would I get more responsibility that I wasn't ready for, that I didn't think that I could handle? Um, but also, if I left, there were equal unknowns. Um, sure, I could move in back. I could move back in with my parents.
Hmm.
Uh, but what does that look like? Being a 23-year-old living with your parents, does the relationship change, and how do you navigate that? I'm an oldest daughter, so nobody before me had figured that out in our family. So I was kind of the guinea pig in that regard. Absolutely scared out of my mind, but it felt like the right choice at the time.
Hmm. Well, and I know it can definitely be daunting and nerve wracking when making these kinds of big life decisions. What was the reaction from the people closest to you in life when you were like, well, I'm actually going to kind of mix things up here and try something new?
Oh boy. I would say that some of the people closest to me would think to themselves, ah, this is not surprising. She is exploring, and her mistakes are none of our business. Or what we perceive as her mistakes are none of our business. And I think that family definitely were really worried because they said, "You're coming home to Chicago. It is more expensive to live here, and you don't have a job. So, what are you going to do?" I definitely think that they were worried. I definitely think that they were scared. Depending on the person, they might have been more open with how they thought that it was a mistake. I was in a time of my life where I just needed to do what I was going to
Mhm.
do, and nobody could tell me differently.
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing to determine as you're going through these processes. Obviously, it's not only a hard choice for yourself, but then having to deal with the opinions of other people can really kind of make it even more overbearing. Um, so then, when you kind of figured out that you wanted to get your higher ed degree, is that what kind of launched you out of this sabbatical, or was there something else that helped with kind of that transition period?
So luckily, what launched me out of the sabbatical was the reflection that working with high school students was not my jam. And also the role that I was in had some there were some policy changes uh, within that role, which allowed me to read books on the job a little less than I would have liked. I went back to higher ed jobs and thought to myself, where's a great place that I could get housing and a meal plan and stop working with high school students? I should go be a hall director again. So I ended up getting hired last minute in October of 2016 at the College of St. Benedict. So I picked up and moved to Minnesota, sight unseen.
What was that experience like, not really knowing what you were jumping into?
Well, it seemed like the start of a trend, really, because that's what I did with Nebraska. Um, so it was kind of just a continuation
Mhm.
of a habit that I picked up, which was I'm sure all of my books will fit there. I'll just go. And so I spent 2 years there, and my partner decided to go to grad school. And so that kind of prompted me, I should go to grad school too, specifically in the same city as my partner so that we can be in the same place. I went to grad school partly to follow him and partly to advance in residence life.
Reflecting back on this journey you've had in your career, would you recommend a sabbatical to folks who are maybe second guessing their career choices or trying to figure out what kind of transition or pivot they should make?
Yes, absolutely. Even though I am very flippant about my sabbatical, and I think the job that I had to put food on the table wasn't my favorite, it did give me the opportunity to have a job that I could leave at 3 p.m. when school was out because I hadn't had that until that moment.
Mhm.
Um, and it also gave me the opportunity to volunteer a lot more. I helped with a farmer's market in the Chicago area. And so I learned a bunch about food access and got to meet a whole bunch of people and see so many dogs. And I wouldn't have had that opportunity if I hadn't taken a sabbatical and had weekends off because school was out on the weekends, so
Yeah.
I could volunteer on the weekends. And I also got the opportunity to see a bunch of people that I hadn't seen in a whole bunch of time. And Chicago is full of culture and
Mhm.
like shows and just weird things to experience. So if another person were taking a sabbatical, I would highly recommend taking it in a place that um, is not surrounded by cornfields, perhaps has a nightlife, and maybe is in a city that you wouldn't otherwise have thought of.
I think that's a cool way to kind of phrase it, especially if it's somebody who's going through kind of that self discovery phase and really trying to figure out what they're looking for, both in a professional work environment, but also that personal life environment, because our careers are only a portion of our day. And knowing those things outside of your career that will make you enjoy an area and help with that work life balance are so important. So I think that's a great piece of advice that if somebody is kind of trying something new, go somewhere new as well and see what those kinds of opportunities can help you discover about yourself. And during the time that you were kind of in this in between, is there anything that you learned that had kind of surprised you, that you weren't expecting to realize during that break?
I mean, I definitely learned that if a landlord says that there's on-site laundry, you should put your eyes on that on-site laundry because if you don't, you'll move in and you'll learn that the nearest laundromat is 2 blocks away and now you have to carry all of your laundry there.
Oh no.
So aside from that, a lot of my day to day is what I make of it, and I think we learn that And we get told, your life is what you make of it,
Mhm.
and you can dream it, you can do it. But I feel like you don't actually know it until you do it. Um, and so I could either stay home and read a book, or I could invite friends over and we could have a movie night. Or there's a train very close by. I could go downtown to Second City and watch a friend do improv. There's a I feel like there's more intrinsic motivation that maybe you need.
Mhm.
Some of the like get up and go, life is what you make of it.
Mhm.
And enough nights on the couch reading a book might not result in the life that you wish that you had had.
So, speaking of like kind of career, one of the things that always comes up is resumes. And there's this concept of career gaps on a resume. So, for your personal experience, how did you navigate some of the I don't want to discrepancy is not the right word, but maybe the variation of that time away and kind of rediscovery? Or were you even asked about it at any point in the future while interviewing for jobs?
What's really funny is I spent a lot of time worrying about that and thinking to myself, somebody's going to ask me what I did. I'm going to have to tell them the sad story. And nobody has asked me. In fact, more people have asked me about the Disney College program than they have about this weird year and a little bit where I was a security aide at Loyola Academy. So I think either it's because I have too few bullet points for that position,
Mhm.
and so it hides itself, or people skip over it because it's still education.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to make as well, that if there is something that you're trying in between and you end up with some kind of a gap on your resume, odds are people aren't going to be as worried about it. They're going to be focusing on the experiences you do have that potentially relate to the job you're interviewing or applying for. So I would agree that it's not something people should really sweat over because A, if they do ask, you can be open and honest about it, and B, the odds are they're probably not going to ask about it because there's more important things to chat about than taking some time off or trying something that may not be quote unquote related to your previous trajectory in your career.
Right. I've always heard that having a good story for that time, though, is valuable. So if I had spent that year and however long unemployed rather than underemployed, then I would probably have written up some sort of package story that I could tell about that. I spent this time volunteering, I
Mhm.
spent this time doing research into a field that I was interested in.
And that again comes back to our earlier remarks of how you can really take any experience and what you've learned from it and apply it to a future opportunity or your current job. And so I think shaping that time to still be able to tell a story and the lessons you were able to learn from it is a great way to kind of shape it so that if you are asked the question, or you do need to fill a spot on a resume, then you've got those different stories to fall back on. And so taking time to kind of self-reflect and figure out what you want to share about those times, I think is a great tool to kind of prepare yourself as you maybe are stepping back out into the job hunt space, or potentially into a new career path. What would you say to a student who's afraid of making, say, the wrong career choice? And so, obviously, wrong is up for interpretation, but somebody who's maybe uncertain or afraid that they're making a mistake.
My first instinct is just to say, Do it, make the mistake. Because that sounds like you're going to get so many good stories out of it and you're going to learn so much. But I think it comes back to the question of what is a mistake? What is the wrong decision? And I think the only wrong decision that I would have regretted is making a career choice or making a move that wasn't in alignment with my values. So I really value empathy and I really value curiosity and helping people. So I ended up in higher ed, but I could have ended up in any number of places. There are plenty of careers that help people. But if I chose to be in a field that instead put me far away from people in a sub basement of a sub basement and was only number crunching, I could be okay with that for a short term, maybe. If there's that mission that I don't understand, I don't think that it's something that I would long term commit to. And so that is something that I would view as a mistake for me, committing myself to an organization whose mission I either patently disagree with
Mhm.
or don't and can't understand.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to kind of reflect on kind of that question and have the, I want to say foresight, but I don't know if that would be the right word.
It might be though, because if you know yourself well enough and you're doing the research into an employer, then you can there are some casual assumptions that you can
Mhm.
make about that future employer's priorities.
True.
And so it's it's foresight in the way of approaching your job search strategically, I
Mhm.
guess, because then you can tailor your approach. And you're
Yeah,
already doing that when you're tailoring your interview question answers. So
true.
why not do that before you even apply? Don't apply for the jobs at places you don't like.
Mhm. Reflecting on your experience and somebody who might be going through a similar phase leading up to a decision, what would you say are some signs that it's okay or even wise to leave a job without having something set up beyond it?
That's a great question for which I'm not sure I have an answer.
Okay.
Um, because I think it's so individualized.
Hmm.
It was right for me because I knew that I could go home. I could go to my parents' place, and so that was one thing that was checked off the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I had shelter and food, uh, and safety. So that was helpful to put in pragmatic terms. But I think that's going to vary based on everybody's needs and available support systems and financial wherewithal. If
Hmm.
you don't have any savings, then having somebody that you can live with for a time is going to be more important. Whereas if you do have maybe a little nest egg that you can start paying some rent and being unemployed for a little bit, getting a job you're not excited about for the meantime, I think it's openness to adventure that is absolutely necessary.
I completely agree with that. And
And
as we're kind of wrapping up towards the end of our episode, I've got one more question for you. And what's one truth about career paths that students don't hear enough?
that there isn't a right answer is the biggest one. There isn't one right career path. But also, I think that knowing yourself is just as important as knowing what you want.
Well, with that, thank you for taking time out of your day to share your very personal story because a lot of times going through an experience like this and taking a step back from your career, some people may not want to share that, but I think it's very valuable to help students realize that it's okay to make changes. And like you said, there isn't one right way to do anything. And so it's important to discover yourself and evaluate what's important to you. And don't be afraid of those career gaps because they may lead to something new and exciting. So, again, thank you for joining me today. And for anybody who is listening, If you enjoy these kinds of conversations, be sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And if at any point during your career journey you need assistance with evaluating your situation, or maybe talking about whether or not a career gap is the right move for you, you can always reach out to us via an appointment on a handshake or send us an email to career@mtu.edu, and somebody from our team would be happy to talk with you. So thank you guys for listening, and be sure to tune in for our next episode.